everyone. Happy Thursday. Welcome to So What, the Marketing Analytics and Insights live show. I'm Katie, joined by Chris and John. Let me see if I can.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Just going to do that. Oh, boy. This week, we are talking about how to streamline your marketing with Google NotebookLM. NotebookLM is one of 1,000 tools that probably hit the market over the past 18 months that has some kind of generative AI built in. And what we want to do today is talk through the basics of NotebookLM, why it's a tool that you as a marketer should be using, and what the heck to do with it. So, Chris, where would you like to start today?
Let's start with an introduction. So if we head on over to Google's website, this is how they pitch it. NotebookLM is your personalized AI research assistant, powered by Gemini 2.0. And we'll talk about all the different features and things in it and all the flashy stuff. But a couple things to note, there are two versions. There is the free individual version, which is using Gemini 2 Flash. So it's Google's newest model. You can upload PDFs and all sorts of good stuff. Create summaries, create audio overviews, things like that. And then there's Plus, which just rolled out like literally days ago. And Plus gives you more documents, more audio overviews. It allows sharing within your Google Workspace. We learned yesterday you can't share outside your Google Workspace. So I could create a notebook, say for Trust Insights, which we will do, and then share it with the team so that folks have access to it. A couple other things that are worth noting. With the restrictions they specify, with NotebookLM, you can have up to 100 notebooks. Each notebook can contain up to 50 sources. Each source can be 500,000 words long. So we're talking about a lot. With Plus, you get 500 notebooks, 300 sources per notebook, and also fewer limits. The big thing is this that everyone wants to know about is on privacy. In all versions of NotebookLM that they're showcasing here for Plus, the Google Workspace or the Google Cloud, your stuff is not trained on, is not seen by human reviewers. It is not true of the free version. So that's an important distinction to know.
So let me ask the basic question. How is NotebookLM different from me pulling up a document and using the search function?
So NotebookLM is a very specific kind of AI system. It is called, the technical name is called retrieval augmented generation, which means that it is you load documents and data into it, and then that special version of Gemini asks questions of the documents you upload to it. What makes it different, special, and better in a lot of cases for certain tasks is if you load a document to NotebookLM and the answer isn't in there, isn't in the data you provided, it will not give you an answer. It will say, I don't have that information. Whereas if you use, say, any other general AI tool, it will say, well, here's what I know about this thing. So if you have high stakes material, like law, for example, you might want to do those queries in NotebookLM so that you ask it like, hey, what is the law on this, on consumer financial regulations? It will tell you and cite where in the document it found that. Whereas if you ask ChatGPT, it could just make it up.
Got it. Okay. So it really, the benefit is that it's constrained to the information. So while, yes, it's hosted on the internet, it's not searching the internet for answers. It's only searching. But again, sort of the basic question of, do I need to use NotebookLM, or if I have a document, why can't I just use like Control F to find the information?
It depends on the scope and scale. So let's do this. Let's actually get started with it so that we can answer that specific question. I'm going to go into NotebookLM. Here's the basic interface. I'm going to create a new notebook, and we're going to upload some sources. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to load 39 weeks of conference calls. These are all the Trust Insights Monday and Friday stand-ups that we have. This is a lot of information. Could you Control F and find something in here? Sure, you could. It's going to take you a while because you got to open all 39 documents. But more important, it is this allows you to see across documents, whereas Control F, you have to go document by document to try and find things. So let's ask something just fun and innocuous. Where has Katie gone on vacation?
Oh boy.
And
Well, the
what
sad
it's
thing is
going to...
going to be she doesn't.
No, she went to Vermont. She went. Chris jokes. She went to Montreal. You actually didn't. You went to New York. You were planning to go to Austin, Texas. You made a potential trip to Rhode Island. So those are kind of the, it went through in very, very, very quickly, as opposed to us hitting Command F over and over and over again. Found those things. So this is the bare bones benefit. Like, you put your documents in and you can figure out what it said, what's in the stuff. This is a huge time saver. And we know there's a decent amount of reliability because it's the documents in here. One thing that's very interesting you can do is you can turn on and off certain sources. So you might want to ask just information from just this week's meeting, or just certain week's meetings. In this example, you won't have to ask it all just by turning them on and off in the left-hand control.
Interesting. We have a question, Chris, that Nancy is asking. Since you're limited to 50 sources, couldn't you then ask it to summarize all of those calls, then add that one summary as a source so that you can delete some of those calls and add more?
You could do that. However, you would lose a lot of the details and things. One of the great advantages of this is being able to say, like, yeah, I may have lots of questions, so I might not. There are cases where you definitely would want the summary, but there are other cases where I was like, no, I actually need raw materials. Now, here is the most important thing about NotebookLM, the thing that will make or break your success with it. You need to be good at gathering and pre-processing data. So, to Nancy's question, if you had 39 PDFs, right, and you are aware of utilities, there's a free utility called PDF Unite. It can glue all 39 PDFs into one, and then you just load that one source, and you have access to it. If you are good at processing, large amounts of text and breaking it up into pieces. We had this experience the other day. We were at a client, and they were asking us, hey, can you analyze this one piece of legislation? It's 1.5 million words. It went past the length limit of what NotebookLM can handle for a single document. So we had to use a free utility to split it into 4 pieces and load each of the 4 pieces in so that we could ask questions of it.
So if right now, let's say, we're using an AI-based transcript service like a Fireflies or an Otter or one of the various tools that already gives me a summary, that already gives me action items, what is the benefit? What is the use case of this additional step? And I know that we're talking specifically about weekly meetings, but maybe you can extend it to a different use case. But yeah, so I'm curious, and I'm really trying to understand why I need something like this versus the million other tools I'm already using.
That's a good question. So this is any document source. So let's start a new notebook, just so you can see. You can add things straight from your Google Drive. You can add things like pages from websites or YouTube videos. You can put it in copy text. You can even drop in audio files. So if I wanted to take, say, the last 100 episodes of Marketing Over Coffee, boom, just toss them all in here, let it process them, and then I can ask questions. So for example, every interview that John's ever done on Marketing Over Coffee, I could put them in here and we could ask questions of the entire pantheon of Marketing Over Coffee guests and say, or even just individual ones. Seth Godin's been on the show like 7 times now. I could take just the Seth Godin episodes, put them all in and say, let's ask virtual Seth Godin questions about what he's talked about on Marketing Over Coffee. And this is true of any data source you can get your hands on. That's why data management is so important, because if you have the data, you can make incredible use of this. Let me show you an example. Katie writes the cold open to the Trust Insights newsletter, and has for years now. And at the end of every year, we bundle them all up and we produce Letters from the Corner Office, which is a PDF. It's downloadable. It's on the Trust Insights website if you want. I put the last 3 years of this in here, and now I have a virtual knowledge base of everything Katie has said in the newsletter. And so I can go in here and say, what are the overarching themes that Katie writes about? And it will spit out a very nice summary of here's what Katie talks about. I can ask it specific questions. Has Katie ever talked about? In fact, let's do this. Has Katie ever written about SARIMA and compared its usage to other time series forecasting methods like gray kite or profit? Now, that's a very specific question.
I mean, I know the answer to that.
Exactly.
I have written about SARIMA, but not in that specific.
It says, do not
content.
contain any information about SARIMA, gray kite, or profit time series. However, the sources do discuss the use of predictive analytics and forecasting more generally. And in all of these things, I can tap in on the citation, and it will show me exactly what issue of the newsletter you wrote about that. So I basically have a virtual Katie whenever I want.
Well, and this, I actually really like this use case because we used this a couple of weeks ago for the newsletter. So we were on the podcast and we were talking about a lot of different things happening. And I was like, oh, we should probably do something about building trust. And you rightly so said, I think we've talked about that a lot. And so we went to this particular notebook and said, what has Katie written about building trust? And it gave me a very long list, plus all the resources. And I was able to use that as the foundation for that next week's newsletter because I've talked about it so often. Why reinvent the wheel when I can really just summarize all the bullet points and point people to those other resources that are still ours? So it's sort of doing a few things. It's giving them the summary, but also giving them the opportunity to look at more of our content.
Exactly. And because this is powered by Gemini 2, it has the same facilities as the rest of Gemini 2. So when you give it PDFs, it can read and see the actual graphs and images inside it. So it is multimodal. The thing that everybody and their cousin loves to talk about is the audio overviews, which is the ability for this thing to create a podcast-like experience. However, they added something new in the most recent revision. They added the ability for you to join the conversations like a guest caller. So I'm going to play this very short 1-minute clip to see how this would work. We're going to use Letters from the Corner Office.
I think it speaks volumes about her approach to building trust. By being so open about the challenges and the learning process, she's showing potential clients that she's human, relatable, and not afraid to be vulnerable.
Yeah, that resonates. Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Does that matter? Does being relatable matter to clients, or is it really something that is an intangible that we can't measure?
That's a fantastic question, and it really gets to the heart of what we're discussing.
It's a really insightful point, actually.
Is it all just a feeling, or does it actually matter?
From what we've read, I'd say it definitely matters, and it isn't just some intangible idea.
Yeah, like we saw how being open and honest, those things seem to make a difference, right?
Exactly. It's not just about appearing relatable, but about building genuine connections.
And that brings up a great point.
Oh, go for it.
What are the foundations of trust that Katie has written about?
That's a great question, and it's helpful to take a step back and look at the big picture.
Yeah, let's unpack this. So what are the foundations?
Well, from what we've seen, Katie Roberts' approach is built on a few core principles.
Okay, let him on us.
First, there's the idea of transparency and vulnerability, which we've already touched on.
Yeah, that seems to be a big one for her.
So that's an example of the interactive version where you can be a guest caller to your own content and essentially be if you were to take the recording, you could make an episode of a podcast that isn't just machines. So, and I think that's the part that I like the best about it, because when the feature first came out, everybody and their cousin started cranking out, automated podcasts, and it was the same two voices all the time. Whereas when you are part of the discussion, then you bring your unique human perspective to it.
It's a little creepy, but I can actually see where that is going to be a really helpful sales tool or a marketing tool. So I know personally I'm someone who struggles to write really good marketing copy or even to speak about myself to promote myself. But if I have all of this information, I can create that kind of audio overview of two people, hopefully putting my work in a positive light for me so that I don't have to do it myself. Like I don't know, John, I feel like you can retire from marketing over coffee. You've done it long enough that you can just load all of these up and let the AI take over and just start doing the episodes for you.
Yeah, just cranking them out. I like how it has the built-in pause too to run the query. It's the, yeah, that's a great question. And then the other one's like, yeah, let's go back and figure out what this is at. It gives itself time to get the answer together.
The other thing about this is, and it's actually is a question that Liz was asking. Are there ways to correct it if it's inaccurate? So there's a couple things. Number one, in the audio overview section, there's an area we can add up to a 500 character prompt. So basically 2 tweets, or used to be called tweets, and that you can specify things like how to pronounce names. If you are familiar with IPA, phonetic notation, you can specify this is how you pronounce Katie's name, because Katie's name is not pronounced. The last name is not pronounced how it's spelled. But in general, it is the same as everything else. Garbage in, garbage out. If you just dump garbage in, it's going to do things that are not great, and it will screw up. I think here's the thing. I personally would never just take the raw output from this and stick it on the internet. Right? I would at least do post-production on it, just if for nothing more than just to fix the compression, because the compression is tuned for what it was trained on, which is basically NPR like sound.
I was going to ask because it sounded very NPR like.
Exactly. Now, in terms of getting other data, Nancy had asked a question about getting stuff that's behind logins and firewalls. You cannot get things like that in here. You have to pull it out for yourself. And there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. You can have scripts like Python scripts that can extract the data. You can use things like Operator from OpenAI and have it record what it's seeing on screen. You can use Gemini's real time. There's a lot of different ways to do that. So that's the core principles. It is a form of Gemini. It's locked to the data you give it, and you need to give it data. And that is the biggest challenge, and where people will get value out of it or not get value out of it.
I feel like that's true of pretty much any system, though. Not just generative AI, but anything that's in your tech stack. It's the garbage in, garbage out philosophy. And when we are thinking about more traditional tech stack platforms, we're thinking numeric. Now we have the opportunity to do more of the, unstructured, qualitative that we struggled as marketers without, really expensive tools to analyze, to do something with. That's why market research tends to be so expensive, is pulling those trends and insights out of what the written feedback or verbal feedback someone's given you is really difficult. Whereas now I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to load all the feedback we've ever gotten through our contact form and, all these other, reviews and, Yelps and whatnot, load it in here and then start asking questions like, where are we sucking wind? Where are we doing really good? Like, what's working? What's not working? That to me is like chef's kiss of a use case.
And that is actually a fantastic use case. Before the show, I went to the Marketing Over Coffee website. I went to our form manager, and I exported the last 2 years of people filling out the contact form. All of the pitches, good and bad, that people have sent us over the years. And so you can obviously imagine, if you're a marketer, yeah, you can take call center transcripts, you can take CRM data, you can take anything, particularly in the workspace version, which is protected and they're not training on your data and no humans review your data, and say, what are the most common issues that people call in about? What are the most common pieces of feedback we get? Let's take a look. What are the most common company types that pitch marketing over coffee to make unsolicited guest appearances on the podcast. Now, I will say also, remember, this is still Gemini, which means that you can type in very basic prompts like this, but if you were to use prompt structures like the Trust Insights Race Framework or the Pair Framework or the Rappel Framework, you don't have to do the priming part because you're obviously loading the data, but still having things like a role statement, like you're a world-class whatever, this is what we're going to do, and outlining what you want it to do, you will still benefit from those prompting strategies. All right, based on the provided sources, the most common types of companies that pitch marketing over coffee are marketing and ad agencies, PR and comms firms, technology and software companies, consulting firms, e-commerce businesses, podcast-related businesses, individual experts and authors, creative content agencies, and other things. And you can ask things like, understanding that it's subjective, what are the least on target worst pitches that marketing over coffee, a business and marketing podcast, has received? Things that are totally wrong for the audience. Now, again, this is a fun example. Think about, maybe you have website feedback from a feedback form on your website, and you were to put all here and say, what do people dislike about us the most, right? Now, let's see. Here are the worst pitches: a foundation repair expert, a cybersecurity consultant, an expert on handwritten letters, a business coach for wedding professionals, an expert on the home foundation industry, an art director, and a podcast publicist.
Does that all sound right, John?
Yeah, that's definitely high on the list. Foundation repair is classic. We're rarely looking for that on the podcast.
So think about this. This is a phenomenal tool for customer care because you can ask specific questions, dig into the data really deeply, and try to understand what's going on. This is also a phenomenal tool, particularly the protected workspace version, for client services. If you are at an agency or you are providing client service, you can, if you know how to get the data out of your email system, put all your client emails into this thing and say, based on my client emails and the responses I've made and things, what things have I not done? I do this at the end of every month with our top clients, our biggest clients. And I say, what did Chris forget to do this month that he said he would in email? I can export from our Slack instance, our company Slack instance, and say what things in these client channels, because every client gets their own channel, did I forget about? And so it allows us to provide safe, detailed, constrained client feedback to know, okay, we're not going to drop the ball on client stuff ever again because we have tools to remind us, hey, you forgot that.
But that, again, sort of goes back to having good data in the first place. And so if it's great that you can load up your emails, but if your emails are not focused and actionable, for example, then you're not going to be able to find out, like, oh, here's what I said I was going to do. You know, I would say something that's probably more useful or supplemental would be the notes and action items and transcripts from those client calls to say, and then the query is good of, what did we forget to do? What did we say we were going to do? Let's list out everything that we promised, this month or whatever. And then, we can go, oh, well, there's 5 things that don't ring a bell.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask this one. What creators of Trust Insights mention on their weekly calls?
Excuse me.
Content marketing ideas. So we talk about, all sorts of stuff on our weekly calls. I can go in and say, what things have we talked about? Like, oh, it would be great if we did a live stream on this or a thing on that. There's a lot of stuff on the ICPs, using the ICP as a scoring mechanism against individuals in the CRM and executive GPT. So there's a lot of stuff that we've talked about. Now, we would have to go through and say, did we actually do that? Should we have done that? Things, but just from our call transcripts is exactly what you're saying, Katie, which is here's what we've talked about. Even, again, so many companies have transcripts and call recordings and all this data laying around, and it just takes up disk space when you could be using it.
So I can get that list, right? You'll share that with me because I'm like, dang it. We did say we were going to do all those things. But I can also see, so John, you are our, chief statistician slash in reality, our head of business development. You do a lot of input calls with prospects. And I can 100% see you using this as a tool to further refine the sales process. Because, if you take 3 or 4 calls a week, that adds up over time. You have those transcripts, and then you can say, what are the common pain points that people are talking about? And then you can bring that to myself and Chris, be like, you guys are only addressing about 50% of these. And that's why the other 50% are walking away, because we don't have things, or we don't have clear examples of how, we address those things. Like, that's a really powerful sales tool.
Yeah, especially as the sales tool gets to be multiple people. It's one thing where a single person has kind of a view of what's going on. But if you were to have 5 or 6 reps making calls or fielding demos, yeah, something like this would be hugely valuable to figure out, because people are only going to care about what closes deals. They're going to miss all the stuff that is not on the mark or is in the closed lost.
Yep. This is another example. I was working on this earlier today. I'm speaking at the Tourism Industry Association of Alberta next week in Edmonton, which is going to be lovely. It's a beautiful place. I love going to Canada. And one of the things that I was asked to at least address is Canada's been in something of a productivity crisis for a while. Could I talk more about that and how AI will impact that? Well, I don't know squat about that. So first things first, you go to an AI-enabled search engine like Perplexity, turn on Pro mode, and ask it for actual research on the topic. Then find the best research, dump it in here, and say, what is this? What's causing this? And so I have one from TD Bank. I have the Tourism Industry Association of Alberta's own publications from their website. Put it all in, and now I have a good idea of what the root causes are based on the analysis, so that I can speak to it intelligently. So again, if you're in marketing and you're a speaker, you run a podcast, you have a YouTube channel, you have a newsletter, there is no excuse now for you not to be able to dig into any subject.
Well, and, think about the companies that are trying to grow their business and expand into different verticals. I remember we were talking about this with a client at one point, and they were like, well, we're in this vertical, and here are the other 3 verticals that we want to, really master and really become the leader in, but we don't have enough. And our team is constantly scrambling to try to keep up so that we can bring on those clients. This is, your own internal, for lack of a better term, your Wikipedia that you can put together and say, what does happen in the ball bearing industry? What are the pain points? And that's such a powerful tool.
It is. So here's another example. This is the new DeepSeek R1 research paper. This is the paper that the folks at DeepSeek published. You can download it off of their website. This is nothing special in terms of confidential information, but they talk about all of what they did. One of the techniques they explained in here is GRPO. Says the GRPO is one of the key techniques that makes DeepSeek so powerful. Explain how GRPO works in terms of puppies. As with all forms of Gemini, and all forms of generative AI in general, you can ask these tools to explain things into a context you understand. So group relative policy optimization as a method of saving training costs of reinforcement learning. The goal is for the puppies to learn to sit correctly when you give a command. The old policy is the not yet perfect way the puppies understand your command. When you say sit, each puppy will attempt the trick with varying degrees of success. Generate a group of outputs. You give the command sit, and each puppy attempts to sit. Each puppy's attempt is an output. Some might sit perfectly, some might sit partially, and some just don't sit at all. You observe how well each puppy sat and give the puppy a reward, and so on and so forth. But we can see just from this explanation, we're starting to follow along about how GRPO works without having to look at the very nice, extremely detailed calculus in here. When you're using these tools, they are phenomenal for training, professional development, for study. If I told you had to write about GRPO for next week's newsletter, this would be how you would get at it.
Oh, 100%. Because, just going on a web browser and searching what is GRPO, not super helpful because you, number one, are inundated with whoever has the best SEO, not necessarily the most accurate information. And number two, you still have to read through it. And number three, then you're just plagiarizing.
That is true. However, there are times when you absolutely do want to plagiarize. And that time is when you are plagiarizing from yourself.
Yes.
One of the most useful things that you can do with this sort of thing is to take something like all of the newsletters you've ever written and dump it in and say, let's outline a book. I want to write a new book. I've been writing a newsletter. I've got a YouTube channel. I've got all this stuff. I know that I've already covered everything I want in the new book. So you would load up all that data in however many forms and formats and places that you've put your stuff. Maybe you drop in the MP3s, all the episodes of In-Ear Insights, and say, now with this data, let's outline the book, and then let's start writing the raw materials piece by piece. Now, I will say, Gemini Flash 2 in particular, kind of a crappy writer. So it will spit out factually correct, very bland text in this tool because you can't do as much extensive prompting as you can with, say, the regular Gemini. But you could then take the outline, the chapters, maybe one at a time, and put them through something like Anthropic's Claude and say, now rewrite this chapter, keeping all the factual information true, but applying Katie Robert's writing style.
And that is 100% something that is on my list of things to do. So, I've been asked, and you've definitely encouraged me to write the 5P book. And I'm like, I don't know where to start. Dummy, I write about it every week. I have so much content about it. Why not plagiarize myself and repurpose it? That's probably the whole work smarter, not harder philosophy that we are talking about with NotebookLM.
Yes, exactly. So in terms of things like streamlining your marketing data, it really is all about using the tool, using its summarization and citation so that you can find and process really good things. There was a question in the chat really quickly about privacy. For NotebookLM Plus, your data, which runs in Google Workspace, your data is completely private. For the free version, it is not, as we typically expect from all things. And now, the one last thing that we want to do is we want to say, how could you get data sources for NotebookLM to process if you want to do some research? Use the AI search tool of your choice. This is Perplexity. You can use ChatGPT search. You can use DeepSeek search. Anything where you're searching the public web. Let's say we want to learn about marketing attribution. I'm going to say I want to find peer-reviewed academic research from credentialed journals about marketing attribution. Focus your results on any publication, paper, or research published after January 1st, 2020. Prefer publications that have DOI numbers, which is a document object indicator. One of the things that people do really wrong with AI search is that they don't give it enough parameters. They don't give it enough things to really focus on. So giving it very specifics, like I only want things with DOI numbers, which only academic publications are issued those citations. So you can quickly restrict down the information. You get an answer to our Perplexity. Believe it or not, I don't actually care. And I jokingly say this, I don't actually care because what I want is the actual sources themselves. So if I can go from source to source and download the papers, put them into NotebookLM, and now I can ask questions of this corpus of knowledge about what do I need to know about marketing attribution. So let's go ahead and just take a quick look here. Let's see if we can download the free PDF. There's one. There was a problem requesting a thing. Here's one. Let's see. This is open access from 2020. Download PDF. What do we got here? The customer average. This is not a PDF. Let's see. Download full text PDF here. Your download progress. Okay, so now, even just with a few of those samples, I can now go to those samples and say, let me start putting in, start a new notebook here. I can start putting in my attribution papers and get a sense of what is current in the world of marketing attribution.
So in terms of process, I'm sorry to interrupt, but in terms of process, is it literally just as simple as start a new notebook, drop in your files, and then you can start querying?
Yep, that's it.
It sounds too good to be true.
It's pretty good.
The reason I say that is, so far in my experience, generative AI hasn't been that straightforward. Like, there's always some kind of a gotcha or, a step that the average user is missing. And obviously, I know that you can do more advanced prompts within NotebookLM, but in terms of getting the data in and starting to use it, this is one of the more straightforward platforms that I've seen so far.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So I just asked, out of these papers, where does marketing mix modeling fit into attribution? And it says it can be optimized marketing budgets, not as effective as attribution modeling and things. And so we can go in and dig more into this and explore this, because yesterday Google released Meridian, their marketing mix modeling software. They open sourced it. And a lot of people are asking questions about, like, should we be using this? I'm like, well, it's really meant for paying money to reach people. It doesn't do a very good job with organic, but no marketing modeling software does that. Attribution modeling is better. Well, how do you know the difference? Find your papers, load them in, ask questions.
This is probably also useful for, so one of the questions that we were answering on this week's podcast was, how do I keep up to date with everything? And you can get that episode at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast. And the answer is, you don't need to stay up to date on everything, but you need to focus the things that you need to stay up to date on. And so if the thing that you're responsible is attribution, then you can be adding in sources or updating sources on attribution as new material is, released, and doing these queries like, what's new? What do I need to know? Break it down for me. And this is a really good way to do that, because the information exists. It's a matter of how you're going to build your process to understand it.
Exactly. Nancy points out, if you're copying and pasting people's quotes or posted sources, you want to keep track of the links. Not only can you do that, but one of the cool things you can do is, again, this is a Gemini-based model. So I could say, produce a list of links to articles I've written about podcasting, format it in APA citation format. Actually, not just create the list, but I can actually put it in the specific what APA citation format is. And so if you were to download, for example, our LinkedIn attribution guide or our 2025 trust guide, trends guide, all the citations at the back are in APA format, because I asked the thing to do it, and it just spits it out, and it's a huge time saver because I don't have to do this.
I mean, that's a big deal. John, I'm curious, what kind of use cases do you think you would use this for in your, daily workflow?
Yeah, it's great just for any fixed amount of, if you've got a whole corpus of a ton of stuff and you need to go back and prioritize. I've got a project client that's working on just go-to-market strategy. They want to know everything that goes into that. And they have, 20 business plans from other folks in the incubator. And so to just load those all in there and say, okay, show me the 5 common programs that these guys have done. And it's really easy. It's, like we talked about before, you can only go so far with Control F. You can find specific mentions of things, but if you've got something more ephemeral like concepts or opinions, this is a lot better way to kind of comb through tons and tons of data without having to actually read the stuff.
Yep. If you have a large cohort of buyers, like maybe you have 90, 100, 150 LinkedIn profiles, you could put them all in here and say, give me a hybrid buyer persona based on everybody that we know. You could dump all of your sales call notes from HubSpot and put it in here and say, and actually maybe even separate them out. So you would have one file called closed won and one file called closed lost, and you would have all of your notes for each of the prospective clients in each bucket, and say, okay, I've got closed won and closed lost in my document store here. What's the difference? What did we do that was different in the closed won bucket that was then in the closed lost bucket? And because the tool can handle huge amounts of data, it can identify those trends.
So just as we're starting to wrap up the conversation on the different use cases of NotebookLM, this is different from other generative AI tools where you would open up like a ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude and start writing something net new, for example. Whereas this is a kind of system where you would want to already have that data and you would want to load it in. So this isn't something that you would open up and say, today I'm going to write a blog post. But you don't have any background information on it. You could load up like 3 years worth of your writing and say, I guess that's the question is this the kind of system where like letters from the corner office, for example, that's 3 years worth of writing. Could the prompt be write a blog post from this? Like, is that how this particular kind of generative AI works? Or is it purely, query and research?
You can do that. You can have it generate new stuff from stuff you already give it. What you can't do is open up a brand new notebook and say, hey, today this, and then you follow like the Rappel framework. You would use a purely generative tool for that. This also does not do gap analysis unless you provide the gaps. So for example, in a standard tool like Gemini or Claude, you can say, here's a blog post that Chris wrote. What did he forget to include in the post? And the model's long-term latent knowledge would go, oh, well, Chris wrote a post about attribution modeling, but didn't include uplift modeling because that, his bad. Unless you had other content in here, it would not be able to do that because that knowledge was not provided. So that's the advantage and disadvantage of a locked RAG system like this, where it can only answer from the data that you give it.
Could you, for example, if we were to take a look at Marketing Over Coffee, could you load up past episodes of Marketing Over Coffee and a keyword list and say, what hasn't Marketing Over Coffee tackled? Like, could you approach a gap analysis that way? Is this the kind of system you would use for that?
Theoretically, yes. Theoretically, you could do that as long as you have the actual data for it. And that,
that's what I'm saying is if you had the data.
Well, let's see. Let's give it a try. Whoops. Forgot to add my sources. So let's add a source. Let's add this keyword list from the Google keyword list provided in the sources. What keywords from the list has Christopher Penn not written blog content about on ChristopherSN.com, referencing the output CSV. That's here. See, one thing that is good to do if you are trying to get very specific answers is to let it know what file it should be looking at, because it does know the source names. And we'll see if this works. Because I know this works in Gemini. Nope, it can't do it.
Okay.
You'd have to do it.
I think that's a really good point to make is that, we're talking about it like a research tool, research separate from analysis better suited for something like an actual, Google Gemini or a Claude or an OpenAI, whereas this is more of the summarization of what's happened versus trying to connect those dots.
Right. And one of the advantages using a general tool like that would also be the semantics. So you could say what concepts are not covered, whereas this tool would have a very hard time doing that.
Gotcha.
So those are the major use cases and how to get started with this tool. It's a very powerful tool, and more importantly, it's a very easy to use tool, which is like very nice.
Yeah. Well, I know what I'm going to be doing the rest of the afternoon, and that's unsolicited pitches to marketingovercoffee.com.
Right, coming up with unsolicited pitches.
I'm going to take that notebook that you just built of Marketing Over Coffee, take the worst and repitch them and see what happens. I'll see if maybe one of these days I can get a guest spot.
Shine them up to make it through the gauntlet.
Oh, Gosh, you folks. Yeah, it's so I would encourage people to try it. Try the free version with the understanding that the free version does use your data. So use the paid versions if you don't want it using your data. And if you are a Google Workspace user, chances are it's already been rolled out to you. Here's how you tell if you're using the paid version or not. If you're using the paid version, there's an analytics button in the top right-hand corner. If you're not using the paid version, that button is not there. That's the easiest way to tell.
Makes sense.
Good.
So, any final parting thoughts?
I think like anything else, just try it out. Do your user stories, which we didn't cover. But do your user stories, do the 5 Ps, and then just start playing around. Like, you're likely sitting on a lot of data that you're like, oh, I don't even know where to start with this. Put it into a system like NotebookLM and say, like, summarize this for me. What is this? What do I even have?
Exactly. All right. That was going to do it for this week's show. We will see you folks next time. Thanks for watching today. Be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you're watching it. For more resources and to learn more, check out the Trust Insights podcast at trustinsights.ai/TI podcast and our weekly email newsletter at trustinsights.ai/newsletter. Got questions about what you saw in today's episode? Join our free Analytics for Marketers Slack group at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. See you next time.